1.9 million rounded. Remember that number. Drug abuse violations. It's actually 13% of all arrests made. 89% of the total arrests for violent and property crimes. Kind of an interesting figure. Let's go to DEA. They did a thing about their drug seizures in 2006. It was interesting. It wasn't much work, but they had to do it. They didn't put up a graph like this for their national totals. It was state by state. You pick out your state, go see what they seized in your state in 2006. They would have come up with a national total, I think, because it's a little bit embarrassing.
That's for the state.
Well, that's for the entire country. 1,180,501 drug seizures. 94.615% of that is marijuana. So there's a lot of talk going on about cocaine and a lot of talk about crack, a lot of talk about methamphetamine. Marijuana is a business of the DEA. We'll show that in some other ways later. 3.2% of their arrests cocaine, slightly over 0.1% for methamphetamine. Seizures, not arrests, I'm sorry, those are seizures of drugs. So every day, you see the drugs are in the news. They're in the news in all kinds of ways. Somebody say that they've got more drugs seized than ever before. They say they have more drug money seized with the seized drugs. They have new record busts attained. More and more drug smuggling operations are, according to them, destroyed, crippled, or ended because of a 2 or 3 year investigation, and they get a few keys of coke or something, or a 1.5 tons of marijuana, which is admittedly a lot of marijuana. Our question at LEAP is, we've had this drug war going on for 37 years. And every year they get bigger and bigger busts. And they seem to think that that's successful. I don't think it is. I would think that maybe they're at about the end of not getting much of anything. Because the program is supposedly to eradicate drugs in this country. How many people here think that we can get rid of the drug problem completely in this country? Anybody? Think we can get rid of the drug problem completely?
Well, I mean, we can get rid of it, but we can't get rid of the drugs. We can get rid of the problem, not the drugs.
Which drugs are you talking about?
Well, I'm not saying we can get rid of drugs. I'm just saying that if we legalize them, there wouldn't be a problem.
Well, alcohol is legal now. It's a drug.
Well,
It's still a huge problem.
well, it depends on your definition of problem.
Okay, let me put it in perspective. You know, I did a Mason convert like this light. I don't know if he will or not. I did something for him a few months ago in Denver about my own police department. I said, you know, my 36-year history of the police department, you know what kept me employed? Alcohol. They were talking about marijuana and the evils, the alleged evils of marijuana. I said, I never went to a family fight, a homicide, a rape, an assault, an accident that caused death because somebody was smoking marijuana. Every single one of those things, domestic violence, because somebody had been drinking. Drinking is legal. But it still creates a huge problem for law enforcement. I used to say, thank God for alcohol and stupidity, I have a job. Sometimes together, sometimes separately. Not for marijuana, and actually, quite frankly, seldom for any of the other drugs. Once in a while, somebody gets a little extra high on coke, and it takes about 5 burly police officers to take down a guy who's high on coke if he gets out of control. Not very often. Not very often. History of drugs. Before 1914, everything that is currently illegal was legal. You could buy heroin from the grocery store. This is an ad from 1901. It talks about heroin hydrochloride, made by Bayer. Take one a day, call me. A 1 ounce package, a bit pricey for 1901, $4.85 per ounce. It's less than that now, processed. Patient dose being very small, 1/48 to 1/24 grams. It's cheapest specific for relief of drugs. Well, in just prior to the Harrison Anti-Drug Act, which made heroin illegal, except to be prescribed by a doctor, they did a study and they thought, you know, this is a problem. People are abusing this substance, and we have addicts in this country. They did a study and they found out that 1.3% of our population around that time was addicted to drugs, mostly heroin, some cocaine, Coca-Cola, you know about Coca-Cola, right? Yes, okay. Fast forward 56 years, 1970. President Nixon and company, very excited about drugs and the drug problem in this country. They also did a study because they were about to declare officially the war on drugs. That was Nixon's war, his first war. He inherited the other war. And they did a study. And you know, there's still members of the population that are addicted to drugs, believe it or not, in 1970. Do you know how many? Population is different, of course. What do you think? Okay. Keep that number in mind. The drug problem in 1970, the problem was mostly so-called soft drugs. Hard drugs were virtually unheard of. Then we had death as a result of drug culture around 1970 were less likely than falling downstairs and dying or choking on food. Here's a little bit of history from the DEA's own briefing book of 2001 about the price and purity of heroin. They started in 1980, went to 99. We backed up 10 years to $6 for a pack of heroin, about an ounce on the street. And the purity was 1.5%. 1980, the purity went up, price went down. 1999, the price was down even more, the purity was up to 38%. You may have heard or seen in the news last summer, several states, most notably Illinois, I'm sorry, Missouri, St. Louis, several deaths from heroin overdoses. The problem with our policy right now, one of the big problems is that when people buy this stuff from a dealer on the street, it's really expensive, it's very addictive. They have to commit crime to be able to afford it. And they don't know what they're getting. They don't know how pure it is. And when you get an extra hot batch, as they had last summer in several cities, where it went up another almost to 40+%, it's enough to kill them. Most of your drug overdoses are not suicides, they're accidental. Because they don't know what they're buying from the drug dealer on the street. Drug use, according to the DEA, back in 1965, about 4 million people were steady users of drugs in this country. 2001, 110 million. More recently, the number, they say, is 112 million people admitted to using more than once illegal drugs. 12% of the population, I'm sorry, 41% of the population over the age of 12 currently admits in surveys to using illegal drugs. Not being addicted, but using illegal drugs. Money spent fighting the war on drugs. In 1970, President Nixon gave a $100 million budget to start the war on drugs. 2003, $69 billion is the total cost. The government will admit to $40 billion. We added up all the Department of Justice statistics. If you throw in everything, the cost of the enforcement, the arrest, the prosecution, the incarceration of all the people that we put in jail for drugs, at $28,000, an average of $28,000 per head per year, just to keep them in prison, it comes up to about $69 billion as the cost of the war on drugs. That's sort of stuff we do in other countries, trying to keep them from growing drugs, but they grow anyway. Meanwhile, the DEA from 73 to 2001, if you look at these numbers, ended up with 3 times as many employees, 20 times the budget. Exponential growth. Here's a little bit of history of the marijuana arrests back in 1980. Not marijuana, everything. Total drug arrests in 1980 were 500,000. 500,000. Last year, as we noted before, 1.9 million. Almost 4 times the number. Drug arrests. 829,627 of those are from marijuana, which is what, 75, 80%? 89% of the marijuana arrests were for possession only. Possession of, not dealing, just possession. Usually small amounts. So prohibition. They like to talk about youth. A lot of the studies the government does, they talk about youth and using drugs and so forth. There's a report, it's an ongoing report of behaviors, attitudes, values,